On a warm summer evening in July 1981, the bustling city of Kansas City, Missouri, was about to witness one of the most devastating structural failures in American history. The Hyatt Regency Hotel, a gleaming symbol of modernity and luxury, would become the site of a catastrophe that would forever change the face of engineering and construction practices in the United States. As the sun set on July 17, 1981, hundreds of people gathered in the hotel's expansive atrium for a tea dance, a popular social event that had become a weekly tradition. The atmosphere was festive, with couples swaying to the music and laughter echoing through the cavernous space. Little did they know that above them, a fatal flaw in the building's design was about to unleash a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. To understand the events that unfolded that fateful night, we must first turn back the clock and examine the conception and construction of this ill-fated structure, the birth of a modern marvel. In the late 1970s, Kansas City was experiencing a period of growth and urban renewal. The city's leaders and developers were eager to create a landmark that would showcase the city's aspirations and attract visitors from far and wide. Enter the Hyatt Regency Hotel, a project that promised to be a crown jewel in the city's skyline. Groundbreaking for the hotel took place in 1978, and construction proceeded at a rapid pace. The design of the hotel was entrusted to Jack D. Gillum and Associates, a local structural engineering firm working in collaboration with PBNDML Architects, Planners, Inc. The general contractor for the project was Eldridge Construction Company. The hotel's most striking feature was to be its soaring atrium, a vast open space that stretched from the ground floor to the roof, some 50 meters high. This atrium was to be crossed by 3 walkways, suspended from the ceiling at the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor levels. These skywalks were not merely functional passages, but were designed to be architectural showpieces, offering guests dramatic views of the atrium below and serving as observation platforms during events. The original design called for the 3 walkways to be suspended from the roof by a series of steel rods. The 4th floor walkway was to be directly connected to these rods, while the 2nd floor walkway would hang from the 4th floor walkway using a separate set of rods. The 3rd floor walkway was to be cantilevered from the hotel's exterior wall. This design was ambitious and visually striking. The walkways, each 37 meters long and weighing approximately 29,000 kilograms, would appear to float in the air, adding to the sense of grandeur and open space that the atrium was meant to convey. The 4th floor walkway was positioned directly above the 2nd floor walkway, offset by just a few meters to create a staggered effect, construction challenges, and design changes. As construction progressed, however, challenges began to emerge. The original design proved difficult to implement, and changes were proposed. In a fateful decision, the engineers altered the support system for the walkways. Instead of suspending both the 4th and 2nd floor walkways from the roof, they opted to hang the 2nd floor walkway directly from the 4th floor walkway. This change, which seemed minor at the time, would prove to be catastrophic. The new design effectively doubled the load on the connections between the 4th floor walkway and the support rods. What's more, the box beams that made up the walkways were now required to support far more weight than originally intended. Despite these significant alterations, the changes were not subjected to rigorous reanalysis or testing. The project moved forward, with construction crews working to bring the architects' and engineers' vision to life. As the walkways took shape, suspended high above the atrium floor, few could have imagined the disaster that lay in wait. The hotel opened its doors in July 1980, to much fanfare. Its striking design and luxurious amenities quickly made it a popular destination for both tourists and locals. The atrium, with its suspended walkways, became a particular point of pride, often featured in the hotel's promotional materials. For a year, the hotel operated without incident. Thousands of guests walked across the skywalks, marveling at the views and the innovative design. The weekly tea dances in the atrium became a staple of Kansas City's social scene, drawing crowds of people to dance and socialize beneath the suspended walkways. But beneath the surface, the fatal flaw in the walkway's design was silently waiting to reveal itself. The night of July 17, 1981. As evening fell on July 17, 1981, the Hyatt Regency's atrium began to fill with people. It was a Friday, and the hotel was hosting its regular tea dance. By 7 p.m., An estimated 1,600 people had gathered in the atrium and on the suspended walkways. The scene was one of joy and celebration. The orchestra played, couples danced, and onlookers watched from the walkways above. The second and fourth floor walkways were particularly crowded, with people leaning against the railings to observe the festivities below. At approximately 7:05 p.m., witnesses reported hearing a loud crack, like the sound of a gunshot. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still as the revelers tried to process what they had heard. Then, with a horrifying groan of twisting metal, the unthinkable began to unfold. The fourth floor walkway suddenly gave way, its connections to the support rods failing catastrophically under the weight of the people on the walkway and the second floor walkway hanging below it. As it fell, it crashed into the second floor walkway, which was unable to withstand the impact. Both walkways then plummeted to the atrium floor, bringing with them a rain of steel, concrete, and human bodies. The collapse occurred in a matter of seconds, but for those present, it must have felt like an eternity. The sound of screaming and tearing metal filled the air as the walkways crashed down, crushing those on the dance floor below. Dust and debris billowed through the atrium, obscuring the horrific scene. In the immediate aftermath, chaos reigned. Those who were able fled the building in panic, while others, stunned by what they had witnessed, remained frozen in place. The lucky ones who had been on the walkways but managed to survive the fall found themselves trapped in a tangle of twisted metal and broken concrete. The aftermath and rescue efforts. News of the collapse spread quickly through Kansas City. Emergency services were inundated with calls, and within minutes, the first responders began to arrive at the scene. What they found was a scene of unprecedented devastation. The atrium floor was covered in a mountain of debris, with the mangled remains of the two walkways lying atop a sea of injured and dying people. The air was thick with dust and the cries of the wounded. Survivors who had escaped injury were desperately trying to help those trapped in the rubble, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. As more emergency personnel arrived, a coordinated rescue effort began to take shape. Firefighters, police officers, and medical professionals worked tirelessly to extricate victims from the debris and provide emergency medical care. The hotel's kitchen was quickly converted into a makeshift morgue, while less severely injured victims were treated in a triage area set up in the hotel's lobby. The rescue operation would continue for hours, stretching into the early morning of July 18th. Heavy equipment was brought in to lift larger pieces of debris, while rescuers used their hands and small tools to carefully dig through the rubble, hoping to find survivors. The final toll of the disaster was staggering. In total, 114 people lost their lives, and more than 200 others were injured, many severely. It remains one of the deadliest structural failures in US history, surpassed only by the collapse of the World Trade Center towers on September 11, 2001. The human cost. Behind the cold statistics of deaths and injuries lay countless personal tragedies. Families were torn apart, lives were irrevocably altered, and an entire community was left to grapple with the aftermath of the disaster. Among the victims were newlyweds celebrating their recent marriage, parents who left behind young children, and elderly couples who had been dancing together for decades. The collapse did not discriminate. It claimed the lives of people from all walks of life, united in their tragic fate. Survivors of the collapse were left with both physical and emotional scars. Many suffered severe injuries that would require years of rehabilitation and multiple surgeries. Others, while physically unharmed, were haunted by the memories of what they had witnessed. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, was common among both survivors and first responders. As the rescue efforts wound down and the full extent of the tragedy became clear, attention turned to understanding how such a catastrophic failure could have occurred in a modern building less than a year old. The investigation that followed would uncover a series of errors and oversights that, when combined, led to the deadly collapse. The National Bureau of Standards, now known as the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was called in to lead the investigation. Their team of engineers and scientists would spend months poring over the debris, analyzing blueprints, and conducting tests to determine the cause of the collapse. What they uncovered was a sobering tale of miscommunication, inadequate oversight, and flawed design. The root cause of the collapse was traced back to the change in the walkway's support structure that had been made during construction. The original design called for the fourth-floor walkway to be suspended from the ceiling by a set of steel rods, with the second-floor walkway hanging from the same rods. This would have distributed the load between the two walkways. However, the design was changed so that the second-floor walkway was instead suspended from the fourth-floor walkway. This seemingly minor alteration had catastrophic consequences. It effectively doubled the load on the fourth-floor walkway's connections, as they now had to support both walkways instead of just one. The box beams that made up the walkway were simply not strong enough to handle this increased load. The investigation revealed that even if the walkways had been built exactly as originally designed, they would have only supported 60% of the minimum load required by Kansas City's building code. With the changes made during construction, this capacity was reduced to a mere 30% of the mandated minimum. The failure of oversight. As shocking as the design flaws were, equally disturbing was the failure of the various checks and balances that should have caught these errors before they led to disaster. The investigation uncovered a series of missed opportunities and lapses in judgment that allowed the flawed design to move forward unchallenged. The structural engineers, Jack D. Gillum and Associates, had approved the change in the walkway design without performing the necessary calculations to ensure its safety. They had relied on the steel fabricator, Havens Steel Company, to finalize the connection details. Havens, in turn, had made their own changes to simplify the construction process, further weakening the structure. Perhaps most alarmingly, the hotel had opened and operated for a full year with these fatal flaws in place. Regular inspections and reviews had failed to identify the problem, and warning signs, such as the walkways swaying noticeably when in use, were either ignored or not reported to the appropriate authorities. The Hyatt Regency disaster forever changed the landscape of engineering and construction. Its echoes can be heard in every structural inspection, every peer review, every ethics class in engineering schools across the country. It's a tragedy that should never have happened, but in its aftermath, it has undoubtedly saved countless lives by fundamentally reshaping how we approach the built environment. As we remember the victims and honor the survivors of that terrible night in July 1981, we also look forward with the knowledge that their legacy lives on in every safely constructed building, in every rigorous design review, in every conscientious decision made by engineers and architects around the world. In this way, out of unimaginable tragedy, some measure of lasting good has emerged, a fitting, if insufficient, tribute to those whose lives were cut short on that summer evening in Kansas City. The story of the Hyatt Regency collapse will continue to be told, studied, and reflected upon for generations to come. It stands as a solemn reminder of the consequences of failure, but also as an inspiring testament to our capacity to learn, to improve, and to strive always for the highest standards of safety and integrity in our built environment. In the final analysis, it is a story not just of collapse, but of the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity,